Hi, and welcome to Chapter 7. In Chapter 7, we're going to be covering web forms, and web forms are a way of getting information from your users and submitting them. We're not going to be dealing with the JavaScript or the server-side script for this purposes, but we are going to set up the form. So let's get started. When we create a web form, it's really important to understand how they are designed in the HTML and how the HTML is able to understand them. We are going to create data fields, which are the fields of data that are going to be sent across to the server when we get to that point. Again, this is going to be setting up all of the HTML stuff. We're not getting into the JavaScript stuff until a couple of chapters from now. A couple of different ways that we can make web forms. We can use regular input boxes. We can do radio buttons, which are options where you can only have one choice, so either a yes or a no. We also have checkboxes where they can be on or off for this singular checkbox. We can do selection lists, drop downs, and text areas. So these are some different controls that we can be using. We also have a couple of widgets we're going to be playing with that are in HTML5, so you don't have to design these on your own. They're already done for you. So we have spin boxes where you can push the up and down arrows to increase or decrease a number. We have calendar controls for both date and time. Slider controls where you can grab and drag horizontally to increase or decrease a number, and color pickers. So these are some different things that we're going to be doing in web forms that's going to show you how to put these into your form, because they're all kind of expected to be able to do that these days. So HTML5 does it all for us. Understanding the way that web forms works is really important. There is generally a script or a database or a server somewhere. And what's going to happen is you're going to be taking those data fields from your different controls or your widgets, and you're going to be collaborating them together into a group. And that group is going to be sent across the internet via a post or a GET to your server where you can do something with them over there. So we're going to be calling a script. In this case, we're just going to be calling it from internally, so we're not going to be dealing with the server-side scripting in this course, but we do want to show you how to get the HTML working and how to be able to use those controls. The first thing we do with a web form is we have to create the form. So we're going to create a form element. We are going to give that form element an ID, and then we're going to add some attributes. Included in those attributes are going to be the action and the method of that action. So generally, when we create a web form, we can do our action as the URL, or sometimes the JavaScript that we're going to be calling is our action. Where are we going to go? What are we going to be calling? It might be calling a service on a server-side script or something like that. We can choose the type of method we want to use as either a GET or a POST. GET is usually something where we append the results to the URL and get some data from our server. So if I wanted to select information about a specific person, I would ask for a GET, which would return me all of that information. So I'm getting information from the server. The other is called a POST, which is where we send information to the server. This is encrypted, and it's sent across the internet encrypted as a data set. That's what we're going to be thinking about when we're writing this web form. Everything that we're going to do is going to be collecting data, putting it into a field list of data fields, and sending it across the internet. If you do a post, you can choose your encoding type, and there's a couple of encoding types on this page that show you how. Once we have our attributes, now you can actually add the content, which is the actual part of the form, and it is nested inside of your form element. So we're going to show you how to set up the original form and add those basic attributes, our action and our method, to that form. Before we begin, we're going to go ahead and look at the sketch that we've come up with for the survey that we want to create. Again, really, really important. You do not just start by typing, you start by sketching. So we sketched out what we wanted our survey to look like. And this is the example that I gave you from the book. So this is what we're going to be building. You can see that we have two sections here. We have a right side and a left side. So we have the left side that has the customer information, and then the right side that has the share your experience. We're going to be putting in some text boxes, some drop downs, some numbers. We're going to do some check boxes and radio buttons. We're going to have sliders, a text area, and a calendar control. So all of these things we're going to be building in this tutorial. Really important to sketch it out before you get started. It will give you a place to keep going back to whenever you want to reference things. Things to make sure you put on here: what type of boxes, what type of input you're going to be putting in, little stars that tell you that these are required. We'll talk about required fields in a little bit, and some descriptions of what goes in here. If I was doing this for an actual project, I would probably be writing drop down right here, and I would be writing number, maybe a min and a max value, things like that. So this is the basics of what we're going to be building. First thing that we're going to do with our tutorial, we're going to rename all of our names and we're going to add in our comments. And then we are going to go and start working on it. First thing we're going to do is insert our form element into our survey.html page. So here's our survey.html page. This is what it looks like when you bring it up. There's nothing there. It just says, thank you for taking the survey, and then the survey will be below it. So we just haven't filled that out yet. So what they say to do is to go to the, directly after the third section, insert the form. So we have our header, is our first section, or our customer survey, and then our footer down here with our order information. So we're probably going to go after this section here, customer survey, and then we're going to start it right here. So I'm going to go ahead and say form, form, and I'm going to give it an ID. It's important to give it an ID so that you can reference it later. If you don't have an ID in there, you're not going to be able to go find the things that you need. So this is where our survey is going to go. I'm going to throw an extra couple of lines in there, save it, refresh. Doesn't do anything, because at this point, all we have is that there is a form there, but not any data. At this point, we're going to go ahead and give it an action. When you have a web form, it's very important for you to understand that there's an action that goes along with it. That action can be a get or a post, or anything along those lines. It can go to a JavaScript, and we'll talk about those a little later. For right now, what we're going to be using is example.com. And example.com is designed to not do anything. It's designed as an example site that you can use. So I'm going to say that my action is going to equal http, it's not an S, / www.example.com. And then we'll go ahead and put in red ball and survey. So assuming that this actually went somewhere. And we are going to give it a method. What type of method? Again, 3 different options that they give you here by default. In this case, we are going to be doing a post. Post is one of those things that it's going to say we're going to be posting some data to our site, as opposed to get, which will be getting some data from our site. At this point, we are going to add a little bit of JavaScript. And I don't want this to intimidate you because we haven't really gotten into JavaScript yet. But we're going to come up to our header, and we are going to add the script for the submit form. They've already written it for you. This is it. This is all it does right now. You don't need to know about this right now. We're going to talk about this when we get into JavaScript, but we're going to put it in there so that we can say on the form submit, I want to do validity checking, is there invalid data with our submit form. So we're going to come over here, and we are going to go up to our header underneath our links, and we are going to add in our script. So I can say script. So I'm going to say my source file is going to equal, and in this case, I'm going to use my red ball form submit.js. And that way we can pull this back up here. So now we've just added that script. Again, still doesn't do anything because we haven't added anything to our actual form. This is what we're going to be filling in. But it's going to allow us to hit our submit without it going where it's supposed to go, and it's going to do what it's supposed to do, because obviously this is a test and a tutorial, and we're not going to be using it. Now that we have our form created, we can go ahead and set up our field set. Our field set is the actual fields that we're going to be doing in our web form. And when we put in our content into our field set, it's really important for us to understand that those are going to be going into a name value pair when they are sent across the internet. You can have multiple field sets in a singular web form. And we're going to actually be doing that in our tutorial project. Our field sets are going to have individual IDs, and then we can add extra attributes to them as they go along. But the first thing we need to do is just assign that field set to an ID and be able to put it in place. Included in your field set, the first thing we're going to be adding is a legend. And a legend is just kind of a header on your field set in your form that's going to let the users know whatever this field set is going to be collecting, this subset of fields. It isn't really necessary. You don't have to do this, but it is a good way of keeping your data straight when you do want to send it across. So in your field set, you're going to be sending your data values that you actually want. And it really is a useful idea to outline your form before you build it. Always outline things before you build them, sketch them out. Make sure you give the individual field sets an ID because you're going to want to reference them. That ID is going to be referenced in your CSS if you want to add and modify some formatting. And it's going to allow us to send some data across to know what the ID is when we get over there. So that field set is kind of like a legend. And you can see in the example here where it says customer information, that's the legend. And we're going to be adding that right now. When you want to add a field set to your form, it's very important for your form to tell your form what are the data fields that I'm going to be using. Inside those field sets, we can have multiple form elements and use that. But you need to have a field set that's going to break things out and tell you what the actual data fields are. So inside my form, I'm going to add my field set. I'm going to give it an ID of customer info because that's going to be the one on the left-hand side. We'll just call it cust info. And I'm going to go ahead and add a second field set. And I'm going to make this one my experience info. Okay, so I have my two different field sets because I have my one for my data or my page that's over here on the left. This is my customer information here. And then the one over on the right, my share my experience. Two different field sets. Now, as you can see, it's simply added two little boxes, but it hasn't really done anything yet because we haven't really added anything. At this point, we're going to go ahead and add our legend. Legends are great because they give you this nice visual of we're going to break things out. And as you can see, we have a legend already described in our proposed survey. So here where we have our customer information and our share your experience, those are going to be my legends. So those are the things that I'm going to be adding as a legend. Legends on their own are individual element tags that we're going to be putting inside of our field set right underneath the beginning. So we can go field set, and then in here we're going to write legend. And I'm going to give it my name, customer information. My second legend now you can see that it has taken these two and it has added this little legend to the top of it, which is just exactly what we wanted. You'll see that they're on top of each other. We're going to fix that with some CSS in a minute. So no worries about that. But that way we have our legend for our individual field sets. So now it's time to start creating some input boxes. Most data that comes in is where you want a user to type in some information into your input boxes. So an input box is a very basic type. It's just a type of text, and that's your basic input box. You can add CSS to make it look the way you want, a certain size or a certain width, but it probably is the most common control in web forms. All of the other types here, we are going to go through most of them to describe the types: buttons, checkboxes, color pickers, date times, emails, so on and so forth. The fun thing with HTML5 is that it has added a lot of these different types, which makes it so much easier to actually build these things. You can have a file type, which will allow you to put in a browse button and be able to click that and have it just work automatically. Also included in your input is the attribute for an access key, and this is where you can have an alt number or letter that is going to get you to a specific field if you want to use that. So we're going to talk about a couple of these different types as we move forward, but let's just start with our basic input. Now we're going to start adding some data. This is where it's really useful to have your sketch. I'm actually going to move this over here so I can reference it while I'm typing. Inside my customer info, underneath my legend, I'm going to go ahead and start building my form. So I'm going to say name, and I want to have a star. And then underneath that, I'm going to use my input box. It's really important that you recognize you can have both a name and an ID field for each of these input boxes. This is going to be my customer name, and when it gets sent over to the server, customer name is what it's going to reference the field as. As for the HTML, I'm just going to give it an ID of name because that's going to stay local, and I can use that to reference or to do any CSS on. Don't use the name field, use the ID field as your CSS reference if you want to make things look right. And we're going to just say that it is a type of text. We'll go ahead and close it out. So just a quick reference. Now it has added my name and its text field. I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of them for this section, and then we will format those and see what we can do about them. Okay, so I've only gone down to the email. We're going to worry about the selection list in a minute. And you can see that it's added it all, but it's formatted terribly because it's just floated, which is fine because for right now, that's okay. We're going to be playing with that and making that format the way that we want in just a minute. When we have our input boxes, it's really useful to have a label for each of those boxes. In our original example, we just wrote the word name or address or something like that. But if you use a label and you put it in a label tag, then when you click on that label, it'll automatically gain focus into the field that it's related to. It's just a really common way of being able to keep track of the labels that go with which input boxes as we go along. And you're going to see how we're going to assign a label. We're going to tell it for as one of its attributes and give it the ID name of the item that it's for. So in the example here, we have street address. So it is for the ID of street. That input is what it's going to reference. You can also choose to put the input inside of a label tag. So you can put a label tag completely separate and use the for, or you can just put text and put label around it, and it'll know that it's the label that goes with it. The example we're going to do is the for, but the other one works just as well. What you can see here is that we have created just a piece of text and some text boxes, but we're going to be creating field labels. Now, there are multiple ways to be able to do your labels, as we saw in the slide, but in this case, we're going to just be creating a label for each of our entries. So I'm going to come up here to name, and I'm going to write label. I'm going to say that that is a label for the field of name. That's the ID number of the field, not the name of the field. It's going to automatically give me that closing tag, so I'm going to cut and paste to move that around. And that's going to add the label. I'm going to go ahead and add these labels for each of the entries. Okay, doesn't look like it's much different over here, but if I click on the state entry here, you'll see it jumps. If I click on the street address here, it'll jump to it. So we like these because when you give them a label, it knows which element it goes with. So we can click on those individually. When we talk about our form layout, generally on a mobile device, we're going to want to have a one-column layout where we do not have two columns because we just don't have the space. We don't have the real estate. Sometimes the one column is a little easier because the label is so close to the text that it's easier to see. You can also use a flex layout to help you to nest the inputs inside of divs for your individual form rows. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is an autocomplete, where we allow the browser to either use form fill data to pre-fill it, or to tell that we want it to be false. Browsers these days are going to store things like your name and your address and your email address, and let's make these really easy for you. You can choose to have the browser pre-fill those form-filled data by setting autocomplete to true, or you can choose to set autocomplete to false to prevent this. It kind of is up to you. If you're using a name that seems appropriate, street, city, state, zip, first name, last name, email, things like this, it's kind of nice for your user to have that information already in. So let's see how we can set up our form layout to make it look right. Now we're going to build a Flexbox for our form to make it look pretty. In our Flexbox, we are going to be setting up each individual item in their own row. We're going to be using divs for this. So we're going to come up to our top for our name, and I'm going to make a div. I'm going to give it a class of form row because that's the row in my form. I come down past the label in the input, and I'm going to, go ahead and format that real quick just to show you how it's going to look. So I'm going to have a div, my label and input for each, and then it will come down. This will allow us to make the format the way that we want. We are going to open up our rbforms.css, which has just a couple of comments in it, which is kind of convenient. And we're going to do our form layout. This is where we're going to be going. Now we can set up our form row for our flex kit. Remember, when you do a flex kit or a flex box, the parent is going to get the display and the flex flow. So we are going to say the form row, because this is the parent element, the form row, and we're going to say display, and we're going to do our cross-browser support, Webkit flex, then we're going to do our display of just flex. We're then going to do our cross-browser support for our flex flow, Webkit flex flow, and we're going to set it up as a row wrap. The last thing we're going to do is go ahead and add in a margin. Margins are nice because they help things to kind of fit nicely. And we're going to add a margin of 7 pixels for the top and bottom and 0 pixels for the left and right. So now we've done our flex flow. Now we have to do the item underneath it. For this one, we have multiple items in there and we really don't want to have to create another thing. So we're going to actually use our wildcard figure. And we're going to say div form row. And we're going to say anything that's below that, wildcard. So this is a nice easy way. If you don't already know or have a consistency of the data underneath it as an individual child, we can just do it this way. And we're going to do our cross-browser support for our flex. And we're going to set our flex to 1, 1, and 150 px because we want kind of 150 will be good size for that. And then we'll do our flex of 1, 1, and 150 px. So we have our cross-browser support and our regular. Can't refresh yet because we haven't added the link to the style sheet. Link href equals rb form CSS, and its rel is a style sheet. Much better. So you can see it went ahead and laid those out for us nicely in a nice individual rows. And then when we add in our Red Ball pizza or our share your experience, that will add over onto the other side. There is our, oh, I'm on a Surface Duo, that's why. There, on our cell phone, scrolling down. See how it nicely flexed? It's just what we wanted. We're going to go ahead and add in a little bit of visual for this. If you look at the example that we have here, kind of, you know, you can always kind of keep going back to that. We're going to go ahead and add in some border radiuses and some font sizes and some padding and margins just to make them a little bit better. So we're going to come back over to our forms. And in this case, we are going to set up for the form itself. So we have our form layout styles, here that we've been working in, we're going to go ahead and add in a couple of things for the form itself. So when we have a form and it is of class ID survey, let's go ahead and add in that we want that to also be a flex kit because we want to have our 2 individual field sets flex as well. We're going to do our display and our cross-browser support of our web flex and our row wrap. So that'll be for the survey itself, which currently has 2 field sets. And then we are going to do the individual field sets. So we are going to do when you're inside form survey, the field sets that are direct children. For those, I want to do the flex and give that the ability to flex. And we're going to set those to 1, and 300 as opposed to 150, just to give them a little bit more space. 300 and 300. I'm going to refresh that, and now they're side by side. We're going to add a little bit more to that, and you can see that they will fall down when you make them too big. But let's add some other formatting options to that so that we can get it looking the way we want. We're going to add a background color. 241, 232, and 181, so that we can really see those just kind of separate from the other code. We're going to add a border radius. We know how we love our border radius. You know, that little curve. I want to make that a 20 pixel border radius. We are going to do our font size. Whoops, font size. And we're going to make that 0.85 EM. So a little bit smaller. We're going to add a 10 pixel padding and a 10 pixel margin. So you can see how they just kind of stand out a little bit better. Go ahead and give us a little bit more visual. With the rounded corners, you can see how it falls down. There's nothing in Share Your Experience yet, but for that, so that'll automatically happen with our Flex Kit. And if necessary, if we get too small, like we do with our cell phone, it will go ahead and do the multiple lines here. Now, I don't like that legend. I want to change the legend around a little bit. So we're going to come down to our legend styles and modify our legend. This is why outlining your styles in your style sheet helps, is because it'll give you a place to go to and keep things organized. So we're going to say, if you are a legend, let's make you with a background color. $179, $20, and $25. Like a red, because it's red ball pizza. Let's make it red. We'll make the text color white so it stands out nicely. And we're going to add in a little bit of padding just to kind of make it fit. You see how it's kind of smushed over a little bit. Adding a little bit of padding is going to give you that option. So now we have this red background that's a little prettier, just to make those a little bit easier to see. We can add some default values and placeholders for our inputs. So if our input is in something where we pretty much already know it's always going to occur in this city or this state or something along those lines, we can pre-fill the value, which will be the value that's going to be going across to the server. Now the user can change this as they go along, but it's nice to have it pre-filled for them if it's a pretty common answer. With a placeholder, as opposed to a value, placeholder is in a shaded text, and it just gives kind of this extra information to the user of what format or what information you want to go into this cell. So you're going to have your text box, and you want to tell the user, I want you to put in your phone number, and I want it in this format. And it'll just tell the user, this is how we do it. So being able to put those in is similar to having that placeholder in there. By the way, you can also do formatting on those placeholders. Some of them are browser specific, but you can add some colors as long as you recognize that the cross-browser support exists and how to set those up. We've talked a lot about cross-browser support, and I wanted to include it in here in case you hadn't figured it out yet. Generally, the Webkit cross-browser support goes with Chrome or Safari, Opera, and almost all of the iOS browsers. So Webkit is to get it to work with an iOS browser or to work with Apple devices or to work with Chrome. The Moz, M-O-Z, is for Mozilla, which is Firefox, so it makes it work on Firefox. The older versions of Opera was an O, so a -O. And we don't usually talk about that one very much. It's older, and most of the WebKit will resolve that. We also have introduced the MS, which is the Microsoft. The fun thing with the Microsoft is that recently Edge ended up conforming to the Chrome versions. So the newer versions of Edge would be working with that anyway. But if you still have an older version of Edge or Internet Explorer, you want to put in the MS cross-browser support. So that's what those are going to work with. When you do the pseudo element or pseudo class for your cross-browser support for your placeholder, the one for MS is going to just be a single colon, and the one for the WebKits and the Moz are going to be 2 colons. So it's just a little bit of a quirk that's a little bit different, but I want to make sure you understood that one. In this town that we're in, the Red Ball Pizza, the pizza company exists in this town called Ormond Beach, which is in Florida. And so we're figuring that most of our customers are going to be coming from Ormond Beach, Florida anyway. So we are going to set ourselves a default value of the city and the state. Now, these are default values. They are not the consistent value, so you can change them if the value doesn't work. But let's go ahead and add the default value to our input for our city. So we're going to say value equals Ormond Beach. And for our state, we're assuming most people are going to come from Florida. We're going to say value equals Florida. What that does is it allows those fields to be automatically filled in. Now, the user can come in here and say, no, I'm from, Great Falls or something like that. And that's fine. And then change. That's no problem. But the default makes it a little easier for your customers. So it's always nice to add a default if that's something that you want to use. The next we're going to do is called a placeholder. And placeholders is going to give you kind of that shaded view of things that we want you to put in there. We're going to put a placeholder for our first and last name up here, and then for our phone and our postal code so that people know what kind of format we would like. So up over in our customer name, we're going to write placeholder, and we're going to write first and last name. Then we're going to come down to our zip code, and we're going to do a placeholder for our zip code. And we're going to do NN and NN. And then maybe the last 4, just to give them an idea of this is how we really want it to look. We're going to do a placeholder for our phone as well. Prince. Now, yes, this is just putting N's in there, but it does give the user the visual of being able to say, this is what's going to go in this field. So when I come over here, I can autofill. We're going to talk about autofills. Postal code, that can autofill as well. But it gives you an idea. I can go and put in anything I want there. So the placeholder is just something that goes until you start typing, but it does make it really easy for your user. Thanks for watching session 1 of chapter 7. Come back next time and we'll talk about some more of those controls and widgets.